So Hannah's heard me say this before, but the projection on the sprinkler system, like the found water, and the projection on the mist, I think is really cool. And it's a really good example of breaking the rectangle or atomizing the rectangle. So that's lovely. So my name's Michael. I already told you that. I have a small design firm in New York called MSD. And this is a couple of sentences that are kind of a more pretentious way of saying we make shit up. And I realize after half a day here that I am in the company of people who make shit up. And I don't think make it up like it's a fantasy, but we have ideas of new ways to put together systems and make new systems, and that's what we do. So I do that too, you do that. Maybe I do that with a slightly different outcome than you do, or to a slightly different effect. We'll see, more on that. So we in my team, we like big pixels, right? In general, in the video world, the trend has been to smaller and smaller and more pixels, right? Higher res, higher res, higher res, right? That's where the technology is taking us. And that's great. We like our pixels big and soft. And sometimes we like to take a big soft pixel and bounce it off another surface and reflect it back and make it even bigger and softer. We're not trying to do anything representational. Of course, you can do abstract and emotional work with high res. In a way, we can only do abstract and emotional work with our super low res stuff. We're also interested in illuminating, not just a surface to make a visual statement or for a line of sight experience. We're interested in illuminating spaces. And you can illuminate a space with six-sided high res projection or LED, and that's great too. So that's not our jam. We do it with light, right? And we use media to drive the lighting because we can follow along with the high-res media, but also it's just a great way to do it. And as I've told you, I had a background where I was super interested in what we called motion pictures at the time, making films. And for me as a lighting designer, and maybe, by the way, I became a lighting designer partly because of right place, right time, wrong place, right time, I don't know. It was the 80s. And it was only when Element Labs came out with the Versatile and the Versatube, that's when I really got to bring it back around. You're smiling and nodding your head, because I've heard a number of people talk about Element Labs, right? That really brought it back around for me, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, media and lighting together, like a Reese's peanut butter cup. How good is that? So that's when I got back. That's sort of when I brought the media back into the equation. So back to making shit up. The systems that we use are pretty funky and weird sometimes, and this has to do with how the lighting fixtures are designed. I heard in another session talking about the limitations of DMX, and tell me about it, but let's talk about lighting fixtures that the architect or the interior designer wants to use that can do things we want to do, but are controlled by phase control dimming or 0 to 10. I mean, that's the worst case scenario, but we go there as well. We certainly have lighting fixtures and companies that make lighting fixtures that can be controlled by media, and they have their proprietary processors. That's great, except if we use more than one manufacturer's worth of stuff, now we're splitting a media feed into multiple processors to control the different fixtures. Okay, this is us making shit up. But often we have lighting fixtures that are just like DMX or streaming ACN or Kynet, and we really have to build something from scratch to make a system that'll control all those different fixtures, because we're not tending to have one fixture type in a project or one control protocol type. So this is an example I like to show. It's a pretty small project. What you're looking at is a screenshot a lot of you probably know of Touch Designer, but on top on the upper right is this lighting control processor, which is really cost-effective, really powerful. It can put out lighting control in all these different protocols, but it can also take in stuff from the network and then spit it back out into another protocol. So we can use this to do a number of things. The touch screen that you're looking at, Zone A, that's actually off-the-shelf part of the system. It just made this really easy to implement. And what you're looking at below that touchscreen is some streaming ACN output, and you probably can't read it, but the first bunch of numbers, and anybody who's a lighting person will recognize this as kind of a lighting DMX output. The first block of numbers are actually controlling the lights, but the underneath, right about, are you going to see my mouse? Right about here, this is putting out streaming ACN to Touch Designer. And we use this to tell Touch Designer how to create these color gradients, which were then projected onto or fed to low-res screens with diffusion in front of them, but also fed to these are lighting fixtures mapped to the media. So this device was sending out data to Touch Designer and then seeing the data that Touch Designer generated, because it turned these nodes back into streaming ACN and turns it into Kinet to run the actual fixtures, which happen to be color kinetics fixtures. So with a very simple couple of off-the-shelf things, it was not super expensive, we were able to give the client the ability, and this was Accenture, so their whole logo is based on a color gradient, but they wanted to be able to have some presets that they could change that would affect the media screen, but also the lighting in the space in those three zones A, B, and C. And if we watch this for another moment, we'll get to the screen here. So again, this off-the-shelf lighting controller gave us the ability to just send 3 different sets of RGB data to Touch Designer, which would then generate that gradient, which would go on the screens, but also, again, be projected onto the ceiling to create a real immersive environment, without having to blanket the space with high-res pixels, which would have been very expensive and not practical in this case either. So this way, Accenture could kind of take their gradient and let their clients, because this was their experience center, kind of create their own with their own color scheme. And this is what the project looked like. Right? So you can see the 3 different zones in the space. Somebody went to one of those touch screens on the wall. They went to zone A, B, and C. They picked 3 colors, and they created a color gradient that was animated. And as it animated in the screens, it also animated in the ceiling. Right? This is a pretty modest, small project, but it's one I like a lot. And this is, to me, another kind of immersive. Probably, I'm a lighting guy now. My favorite kind of immersive. So I'm going to show you one more project. This is in Chicago. This was in collaboration with ESI Design. They were the prime designers. It's called Sensing Change. And this is a media-driven public art piece. It's actually also weather data-triggered, media-driven public art piece in which we have one stream of media controlling the 25% of the bars, which are a white light fixture, I think it's a 10 or 15 millimeter pixel pitch, facing the viewer, and then the other media stream controlling the other 75% of the bars that are a color-changing, pixel-driven fixture that are basically illuminating a very unfortunate cinder block wall on the outside of a parking structure that bounded this amenity space in this new big fancy office tower in Chicago. The office tower, by the way, is kind of just out of frame to the right here, kind of behind us, right? This is their second-level terrace amenity space. In this capacity, we make the pixel map for the media designers. We were not the media developers for this one. We were in the previous project. And you can see we, basically said all the white light stuff goes in the bottom and the color stuff goes on the top. But of course, the trellis, it was a trellis, puts it together for us. And because we're lighting designers, they expect us to be electrical engineers. This is a construction project. There are licensed engineers. We can't do that, but we have to help them. So we put together these drawings in, identifying each fixture. Each fixture, by the way, had its own IP address or 2, and it was a whole networking thing as well. We're not the IT people, but we have to sort of put together the information to help them do it right, and even kind of break things down for the electrical engineers in such a way that they can power it and it won't blow a circuit. So I'm just going to end with an attempt to show you a video that we had trouble loading. So if it doesn't work, you can go to michaelstiller.com and look at the video, but we'll see what happens. So I think I mentioned it was weather data driven. Some of the media, obviously, I hope, looked like precipitation or wind, and we were taking live weather data and triggering pre-rendered media. Generative was in the cards for a while, but that's not how it went. So that's what I've got. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah. Applause first.